good afternoon, or good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or whatever time it is where you are. Today we are in the second of 3 industry insights, live from VeeamON. This might be my favorite one, just because I get to be joined by my dear friend, Leah Trushnecki.
Thanks, Jason.
I learned so much from you when I first joined Veeam, and then I came from Microsoft. You went to Microsoft, now we're back here, and we're talking about something which is near and dear to both of our hearts. We're talking about everything cloudy. This is going to be based on the Cloud Protection Trends 2024 report. That report was debuted in May. I mean, mostly, in 2023, we really looked at IaaS and SaaS and PaaS. This year, we really leaned into BaaS and DRaaS. So not just what clouds are you protecting, but what are you protecting them with? Leah, any opening thoughts before we kind of get into the data?
I'm really excited because we're calling in from the Solution Expo Hall today. And so we are surrounded by a lot of our partner booths. And I think that's going to be so much of our discussion today is how Veeam will continue to scale and provide value-added services, which are so important as we look at backup, because ultimately we are just one cog in a very big machine. And as threat actors and other kinds of disasters continue to proliferate, it's going to be really important that we all work together as a team to stay ahead.
Okay, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about the canvas for a second. So we're going to talk about, bring up the first piece of data, and what I'd like to lean into is every year, this is actually not from the cloud report, this is from the data protection report, but I think it sets a landscape. Every year we ask organizations, what does your production infrastructure look like, right? And so what you're looking at here is about 55% of workloads still run in a data center. Data center ain't going away anytime soon, right? Now, that being said, it's about half and half, physical and virtual. 45% of workloads now run in the cloud. And Leah, I don't think it's a stretch to say, what percentage, this is production workloads.
Right.
What about the workload of backup itself?
Right.
Right? And so we're seeing such a strong interest in BaaS and DRaaS.
Yep.
In fact, why don't we get into that piece? One of the other questions, and this is arguably one of the most powerful questions in the Data Protection Trends report, is how likely are you to use backup as a service, BaaS, or disaster recovery as a service, DRaaS, sometime over the next, 24 months, 2 years?
Yes.
7 out of 8, Leah. 7 out of 8 will be embracing BaaS or DRaaS in some of their servers over the next 2 years, and 1 out of 8 will wonder why they didn't do it sooner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting about this is, as we started kind of the cloud journey 15, 20 years ago, so many organizations were looking to backup as sort of their first foray into the cloud.
Yes.
So now we have really reached full maturity. So the conversation isn't just, should you be doing BaaS, should you be doing cloud? It's really about how you do it effectively. So that's what's so exciting about some of this data sets. Hopefully this is confirming for some of you in the audience why you may be using backup as a service, because you're really in the popular crowd now.
I love this. Okay, so why don't we leave one more in, because there's a journey piece in here. So we talk about things like BaaS and DRaaS, and those are wonderful terms, right? So one thing that we were challenged by a couple years ago is what does BaaS actually mean to you, right? Because there's a lot of vendors that use different terms for that. Yep. Would you like to break down the beginning of this slide, and then we can talk from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we have been asking this question over the last several years, the answers have actually dramatically changed, and I think that's really interesting to look at. So things that we assume are sort of table stakes. Is it cloud-based?
Yep.
Yes, it should be cloud-based. I think that's a great definition. Of course, backup as a service could include managed backup sitting on premises.
Sure.
Right? And so it's absolutely something to acknowledge that this can be a full service. However, table stakes, there should be a cloud component. Is it a web-based UI, right? I think that's absolutely table stakes here. Something that we thought was really interesting that popped this year, though, is where the service is coming from and what is that relationship to the backup software vendor themselves. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the Veeam team took from that?
Yeah, so if you haven't already done that, look in the QR code in the upper right-hand corner and download the report. And if the QR code is not working for you because you're on a tiny little screen, it's VEE.am/CPT24, Cloud Protection Trends 24, and it'll get you to the report. The chart is admittedly an eye chart, right? It's a busy chart. What you're looking at here is the long lines are when the respondents could choose any and all of the options that apply to them. Yes, it's a web UI. Yes, you should store it in the cloud, blah, 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 right? Subscribe as a service.
Yes.
That's part of the blah, blahs,
yes.
right? But as you mentioned, one of the things that we've been tracking over time is because we do many of the same questions year over year, we get to do trajectory. And when we first started asking the question, oh gosh, 2020, 2021, around that time, the idea of was the service being delivered by the first party backup software provider? It was number 9 overall. It was only number 7 in importance. It's like, okay, that's an interesting data point.
Yep.
A couple years go by, now it's number 4 and number 3. A couple of years go by. This year, it's number 1 as most determinant as far as what customers are looking for when they're looking for BaaS. It means a lot of things, but for most folks, it means I just want to subscribe the whole thing from the software vendor I know I can trust. And there's some, I'm not allowed to say one throat to choke anymore.
Sure.
So how about we say one hand to shake?
I like that.
Right?
Yeah. It's a nice positive outcome.
I'm learning, right? Therapy is doing wonders, and HR got involved. So, But yeah, so I love the fact that I think we are unifying on there's the table stakes and then there's the differentiables. And the differentiable of delivered by the first party is there's some nuances this though we talk about. So does that mean all third party BaaS goes away? And the answer technically is hell no.
No. Absolutely not. And I think ultimately something that we're going to talk a bit about here is how our service providers partners differentiate, right? So you can kind of look at something like a first party offering from a backup vendor like Veeam to be the sort of entry level offering, right? What are the best ways that you can integrate that software and the cloud service together? But again, backup is just such a small part of this overall set of cogs, whether your use case is BCDR, recovering from an actual threat, disaster. There's so much more that needs to go into it, and that's where the value add will still be.
Yeah. So shall we dig into that as well?
Absolutely. Let's
do
it.
So now we've kind of set a baseline definition. You mentioned, Leah, that for many organizations, when they first forayed into the cloud, backup was one of the first scenarios that got to happen, right? So what you're looking at here on this slide is the journey around cloud-powered protection. Now, there's 2 ways that you can look at this data. We asked organizations, and by the way, when I say organizations, I should mention 1,600 respondents, all unbiased IT leaders, IT implementers that leverage the cloud as part of their data protection strategy, right? This was not sent out to say a Veeam panel or Veeam cloud provider customers. This was an unbiased lens. But one of the questions that was asked for them was, when you first started using the cloud as part of data protection, how did you do it? Whether that was just storage, cloud storage augmenting your on-prem backup, or did you immediately embrace a cloud managed service, right, from one of the tens of thousands of service providers out there? And then the second part of the question was, what are you doing now, right? Are you still on that kind of modality, or did you switch? So there's 2 ways to look at this chart. So let's take a look at the first way. And the first way is collectively it's about half and half. I mean, like within 1 percentage point, right? So 51 to 49 around the idea of managed backup as a service versus simply augmenting on-prem backup solutions with the cloud storage here. And what I get from this data, there is no wrong answer.
No, absolutely. We need to be able to support all these different SLAs, and there's a couple of different data cuts that we have in that cloud protection trends report. So again, highly recommend downloading it. So the nice thing that we need to understand here is that backup and backup as a service is not going to be monolithic. We know that we need to be meeting different kinds of expectations. So if you're feeling within your organization like some workloads might just need backup to the cloud, set and forget, that makes sense. You may find that there are other more critical workloads or more complicated workloads that need that higher touch. And the good thing is I think the backup community is really responding to that.
Yeah, and if you think back even like to the first slide that we talked about around the diversity and the heterogeneity of on-prem physical, on-prem virtual, and multi-hybrid cloud on the production landscape, certainly I'm a huge fan of why wouldn't you use one cloud to back up another cloud? Right, so that's huge for me. That said, there's a lot of on-prem workloads. I like the agility and the RTOs I can get out of having an on-prem first recovery tier.
Absolutely.
And then, oh, by the way, get your data out of the building.
Yes.
Right? So lots of things that we can do from that perspective. So, but this is one lens. Now let's look at the lens for, remember we said, are you still using that method or did you switch? So let's look at the other way. So only 1 in 5 are still using the method they originally started with. 4 out of 5 organizations actually switched from one modality to the other. That alone by itself is interesting, but maybe not that informative. What I think is more informative is if you look in the lower left and compare that to the lower right, what you see is when an organization switches. So they tried one thing, they decided to go the other direction. It is a 2-to-1 ratio where they said, you know, it's one thing to get your data out of the building and put it in the cloud, but I'm not really unlocking the full value of a cloud-based capability unless I have somebody smarter than me managing it for me that is part of that outcome. And Leah, just to get a little nerdy for a second, I kind of think of it like when backup 20 years ago, people didn't know how to use disk for backup. They could only write to tape.
Yes.
And so they made disk look like tape, which was great. You got some benefit out of it, but until you fully leverage disk as disk, you didn't get the same thing. I think we're in the same thing here, that for many organizations, yes, get your data out of the building.
Yeah.
But until you've actually unlocked managed services, someone else is troubleshooting, someone else is patching, someone else is helping you deploy, you're not wholly unlocking that value, which is probably a great transition into why is it that we love our partners so much.
And ultimately, I think this is a walk, crawl, run kind of situation.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so I think a lot of folks, you may want to dip your toe in the water, start small, you think you have a very specific use case, and then as you use it and as you encounter problems, for example, where you need to be phoning a friend here, the good thing is that so many service providers do scale up to those kinds of services, and you can see exactly from this data why that's important.
So what do you think about the idea then of, in many cases we talk about solving data protection one workload at a time. Right? So it might be that you have a mediocre or better, or at least it's sufficient, on-prem backup solution, but you're now embracing Microsoft 365.
Right.
And your on-prem solution as a legacy solution doesn't back up 365, right? So let's solve the thing which is underprotected.
Yeah.
And once you've proven that, now we can start working backwards into embracing those other workloads. There is something to be said for a single UI over time.
Yes, over time, that would be nice. But again, I do think it makes sense to go workload by workload and just be agile to prepare for that.
Sure.
One of the things we did this week at VeeamON is we met with a group of VIPs here at Veeam. So these are senior IT leaders within so many of our customers, and actually some prospects who were in the room doing some ransomware recovery tabletop exercises with us. It was yes, it was an amazing workshop. And there was a very healthy debate about how do you set your RTOs and your RPOs with each of your line of business owners. So when you think of something like Microsoft 365 backup, there are so many stakeholders involved that don't understand IT. And ultimately, you're having to balance things like cost versus risk, right? And that's where, again, having a walk, crawl, run, being able to scale up is going to be so helpful, because sometimes you ask your business owners for some of that feedback, you think you get it, you find out you need more.
Yeah, so tomorrow, Jeff Reichert is going to be in that chair, and we're going to be talking about the ransomware report that debuted this week. And one of the scenarios in that is comparing the insights from senior executive leaders versus the implementers along the way. Yeah. One of the things I'm so proud that Veeam does is we're so cognizant of IT leaders do think differently than implementers, right? And so getting that lens and what we do for the execs on site, I'm super excited about what we do there. So you're going to have to tell me more.
I definitely will. There was a healthy debate in the room.
Dang it. All right. So sorry, we can nerd out all day, but let's talk about a little bit more of the data, right? So in one of the other questions was around, okay, so let's lean into the data, and we're going to talk about, oh gosh, what's the next topic that we're in? Outcomes. So if managed service is the ideal state for most organizations, the difference for most organizations between I could run it myself and embracing management, yes, there's operational efficiency. Yes, the idea of I don't have to patch and maintain, I don't have to build my own.
Which is huge, by the way.
Absolutely.
I think especially for your conversation tomorrow.
Yep.
I mean, I think that the patching and dealing with all of the vulnerabilities is a very critical part of any kind of managed service. So not to count that out.
Fair enough. And actually, I think I'm missing the slides. Let me go back one and see if it'll come back for me. Oh yes, I was missing one. Yeah.
Hey, this is live.
This is as live as it gets. All right. So when we're looking at the data, one of the things that we saw was when organizations were asked, okay, so why? Why did you embrace the provider that you did? And I think it's super interesting that yes, 24/7 monitoring and just that the assurance, right? That it's gonna work for me all the time is cool, but take a look at options 2 and 3, right? So the idea of expertise. So yes, I wanna make sure that it's well cared for, that's, it's the curation, but then I can't afford a DR expert and a cyber expert and a prevention and a compliance and
exactly.
Yeah, and so why not grab that in bench strength instead and embrace a partner for that?
No, and the bench strength is a perfect way to put that, right? And it's so funny you call it DRaaS. I'm a big fan of calling it DRaaS. In the cloud, there's already so many different ways to pronounce these different acronyms. That's part of the fun. But
mine's right.
Of course, that's fine. DRaaS. No, but in all honesty, I think this is really where some of the most important value that our partners can provide lies. Because at the end of the day, so much of this is about the actual expertise, the real world life scenarios that we have. And a lot of our partners have been through things like, oh, a customer of mine had a hurricane come through. Their entire data center flooded. I need to help them lift these servers out, take them to potentially a FEMA zone away, depending on how big the storm could be, right? And they have that kind of expertise on staff. When you're in a disaster situation, so many times, whether you have a plan or not, you probably didn't test that plan if you had it, and your actual human beings are panicking. They are thinking about their friends, their family, their tiny fur children like I have. I'm not really gonna be thinking straight. And so having some experts in your corner, it can really be a huge game changer. And again, the software is just such a small part of that equation. So I'm not at all surprised to see some of these BCDR outcomes as part of this, especially on the documentation side. I know you're a big fan of documentation.
I am a big fan of documentation.
Nerdy.
Nothing matters if you don't have paperwork on it.
Exactly.
Right? It doesn't.
And physical paperwork, that came up again in our VIP discussion yesterday. We asked everyone in the room, raise your hand if you actually have a paper printout of your disaster recovery plan. One person raised their hand. I was absolutely shocked. So not to shame you, you're in the same boat as everyone else if you don't have a physical paper copy, but maybe this will be a nice reminder.
You know, 20 years ago, I actually used to work for companies where we would give these yellow binders that are waterproof and had a little laptop in them and a large cell phone that was 10 pounds each. And
but I'm also a millennial and I don't own a printer, so.
Oh gosh. And now speaking of millennials though, so I will tell you, so my son actually works for one of our VCSPs.
Awesome.
And so I hear him doing either real ransomware recoveries or tabletops remotely every week. That is part of his weekly tasks. And it is amazing to, every once in a while I get to hear just a little bit and it's like, oh, dang, that's real. And so anyway, so expertise certainly is a big thing. In fact, one of the things that Dave and I talked about on this morning's Industry Insight was the idea that 47% of orgs are looking at changing jobs. Right? So it might not be that you're taking care of their fur baby or that there was a loss of life, but oh, by the way, last week they quit. Not their problem anymore. And so so benching that strength, strengthening the bench is a huge, huge thing. So yes, expertise is there too. There's one more thing on the data that we want to kind of lean into. So there was the question of, I don't know if I'm just tapping this while we talk or.
I think so.
Have you mentioned that this is live? All right.
This is live.
All right. Let's get to the one last slide in the deck because one of the things we asked was, okay, so there's expertise, there's outcomes that are involved. The last question, OMG, is was when a service provider was asked, what kinds of solutions, when the customer was asked, when you chose your service provider, what were you looking for? And the answer was outcomes. Right? It wasn't necessarily, the software itself, that factored, right? It wasn't necessarily brand reputation, that factored, but the top choice of why the customer chose the provider they did was competency in an outcome that the customer was looking for. And unpack that for us. What were the outcomes?
I hate to keep referencing this VIP session, but it's so top of mind for me. I think what's really exciting about this is that, when you're in a sort of doer role, it can feel very tunnel vision to think about the speeds and feeds that you're actually trying to affect. But as you move up the food chain and you are trying to justify IT spend, different decisions, ultimately it's really important that you understand the impact to the overall business. So we've talked a lot about DRaaS. DRaaS. I'm just going to keep calling it DRaaS. And it's not a surprise to see that disaster recovery is the #1 outcome that they're trying to achieve. And again, there are so many types of disasters. It's so difficult to stay ahead of those disasters. So I'm not at all surprised to see that at the top of the list.
So certainly, absolutely on the DRaaS side is a big thing. I was actually equally surprised to see, so #2 was just simply operational efficiency, right? I just need it to work better, right? I'm going to point out though, and this is kind of off script, but if you look on the #3 one, the idea of migration, easily one of the hottest topics at VeeamON this week is, for some reason my licensing seems to be changing on my preferred hypervisor. Should I move it to a different hypervisor, or should I finally bite the bullet and move that data into
To
a
ultimately
cloud host?
modernize it.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? And is that going to be lift and shift because I can't actually modernize the app itself, so I'm going to have to at least move it over for a couple years?
Can you cost model that for me? Because now I know I need to bite that bullet and also eat it on the cost
Yeah.
side.
Fun fact, nobody on staff has skills to do that.
No.
Right? In fact, some of the marquee partners that have booths here at the show, it's like they've pivoted from being cloud companies to just simply being trusted counsel.
Yes.
Which is actually a really neat scenario to see along the way. All right, there's more data. It's in the QR code. Go download the report. But Leah, you and I have collectively spent, I think, if I get the numbers right, about 45 years between the two of us helping organizations with data protection, and most of it has been cloud powered.
Yes.
Right? So you've got, what, 3,000 people on site? You've got umpteen tens of thousands of people
Yeah, I
remotely.
think we have about 15,000 registered, so.
So you've got their captured audience. What's the one thing that you need them all to hear?
Ultimately, I want everyone to understand that the cloud is not some monolithic offering. And the more years we get into this, the more expensive the cloud can be, the more complicated the cloud can be, and the more important than ever it is to find your face of the cloud. Because ultimately, the cloud is not a charity, but it is an amazing way that you can drive better outcomes for your organization. So, whether you're looking to find a service provider in your area, a value-added reseller in your area, or you just want to connect with the Veeam community, we are all here to help each other, because at the end of the day, resiliency is going to just be a team sport.
Ooh, I like that one. We could have, back when Veeam used to print T-shirts for everything,
Oh, that would be a
resiliency
good
as a
one.
team sport.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, we're going to make that happen.
We should talk to your boss's boss, because
Yeah,
I
the
hear
boss's boss, or maybe the boss's boss's boss. Yeah.
he prefers sir. All right, so I love what you also said about, the cloud is not a charity, right? So we should not be talking about lowest bottom dollar cost. We should be talking about unlocking value.
Yes.
And recognizing investments for that. All right, so that was yours. So for mine, I'm going to start with why wouldn't you use a cloud to back up another cloud? Right? I mean, there's very few scenarios other than a few regulatory agencies that really need to bring that data back down. I'm going to also tell you what I've told people for years, which is why BaaS when you can DRaaS. Right? It's one thing to actually get your data up there, but then you have to suck it back down. Instead, I would much rather just turn the darn thing on, right? And just keep the business running. And then lastly, this was actually at my book in 2010, get your data out of the building. Right? There's almost nothing else in disaster recovery, business continuity, cyber resiliency, business crisis management. Pick your favorite lofty term. It all starts with survivable data. Get your data out of the building. All right. So download the report. vee.am/cpt24, or the QR code, you can find it just about everywhere, or just Google the darn thing, right? But download the report, and hopefully, the reason we publish all this data is to help you have good conversations with your IT leaders, with your business stakeholders, all the other folks that are there. Thank you for joining us from VeeamON. Leah, thank you so much for your friendship and for the collaboration. This has been great.
This is great.
Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of VeeamON.